Louisa, Nicola, you are one of the premier brain performance coaches that is out there. You're a neurophysiologist. I want to ask you, what are your 5 golden rules when it comes down to brain performance and really just getting the most out of our gray matter up there? But first, there's a link down below that gets you a free variety pack of LMNT electrolytes. That's drinklmnt.com/Thomas. So it gets you an entire free sample variety pack with any purchase. So these are electrolytes that you can consume if you're working out or if you're just trying to cut calories and you want to consume something that doesn't really have calories. That's why I use it. If I'm trying to restrict what I'm eating, it satisfies me. I feel like I can sip on something, it tastes good. Plus I get a little energy boost because of the sodium in it. I get those minerals that I need. But especially if I'm working out, it's like I get to have a sports drink without the calories. Not to mention there's 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams potassium, and 60 milligrams magnesium. So it's a really nice profile, and the flavors are out of this world. The citrus salt, the mango chili, the grapefruit salt is hands down my favorite. There's a chocolate salt that you can have hot. It's amazing. So that link down below gets you that free variety pack so you can try all the different flavors with any purchase.
Yeah, so it's very interesting because I always say that the brain is like the federal government. It completely controls every aspect of your life, from the actions you do, the thoughts that you have. Everything you are today is a result of how well your brain is performing. And the great thing is, through neuroplasticity, which is pretty much our ability to rewire our brain, we can have adult neuroplasticity. We can change anything that we're doing. So let's go into the 5 key performance indicators of peak brain health. The first one is, and of course, it's exercise. I know people hear about this often. I know everyone understands exercise is important for the body, but we also fundamentally have to understand why it's so important for the brain. And here's the reasons. First of all, your brain is the most vascular-rich organ in the entire body. That means that it has a lot of blood vessels, okay? So if you remember back to anatomy school, you remember that we've got arteries, veins, and we've got these little capillaries. And we have these 2 massive arteries that come out of the aorta. They're called the vertebral arteries, and they go up into the brain, and we have branching off of those arteries. And it's actually funny, there's a really great fact is, if you were to pull apart all of the blood vessels and all of the vasculature in the brain, it would span 400 miles, okay? So the brain is extremely rich in veins, arteries, and what do? They deliver blood, oxygen, and nutrients to the brain. So the more blood that we are getting to our brain, the more oxygen, the more nutrients. Therefore, we're going to be able to have a higher performing brain. So how do we get more blood flow? It's of course through exercise. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why exercise is fundamentally important. But let's break apart exercise. We've got aerobic, we've got resistance training, and then we've got what I call neuroathletics. You can think about it as neurocognitive training. All of them are essential for peak brain health. Aerobic exercise is generally something where you're running for long periods of time. You're generally at a 65% of maximum heart rate zone. You're doing it for about an hour. This is important for 2 reasons. 1, you've got blood flow to the brain. But 2, when we engage in aerobic activity, we are producing a lot of BDNF. And BDNF stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It is a growth factor for the brain. So more exercise in the aerobic zone equals more blood flow, more BDNF. In fact, there's just so many studies that are being done in this zone to show how important it is for the brain. We have this little area in the brain called the hippocampus, and it lives deep within the temporal lobes. It's like a seahorse-shaped structure, and it's primarily responsible for memory formation, memory consolidation, and a number of different other things. And it's the first thing to shrink as we get older, and it's the first thing that gets attacked during neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's disease. It's a beautiful structure because if you actually have a look at it, it's the only structure in the brain that can grow new neurons in adulthood. So neurons are a type of brain cell. We have around 87 billion of them in the brain. And as we get older, they atrophy. That's just due to the natural brain aging process. But when we exercise, specifically aerobic activity, through this BDNF pathway, we can grow new neurons in the hippocampus, therefore preserving memory. And not just that, you're not just growing new neurons, you can actually expand, it grows in size and volume. So sticking to aerobic activity, at least I say 4 hours a week. You can do more is great. But if you can be doing that, it's absolutely foundational for brain health.
So based upon that, there's also some, I've seen interesting literature that's starting to come out surrounding the world of even lactate having an impact on the brain. And that obviously is a byproduct of exercise as well. Do you have anything to say there? I'm kind of curious on that.
Yeah, it's funny because I was going to go into that with resistance training. It can be seen. So when we do resistance training, we know that we're having, I believe, because this is my primary area of research, we are having a much more structured approach to brain health with resistance training. Because it turns out that when we do resistance training, we actually release myokines. Myokines are muscle-based proteins. So lactate is actually one of those byproducts of resistance training. So think about your muscles, okay? You think about your skeletal muscles. When they contract with force, so let's just say we are doing a bicep curl, our bicep contracts, they release myokines. So these little proteins get released from the cell of the muscle. And when they get released, they go into the bloodstream and they have an effect on different organs. So we have receptors on all the different organs in our bodies, on our heart, in our brain, and our spleen, pancreas, everywhere. And these little receptors are there specifically for myokines. So when these little muscle-based proteins are released, they go and they lodge into different receptors all over the organs, and they have really beneficial effects. For example, we know that resistance training, certain myokines can go into the prostate and attenuate tumor growth. And so that's a really great area of research right now, resistance training that can starve off prostate cancer. But when it comes to the brain, we know that certain myokines like lactate, irisin, cathepsin B, when these are released from the belly of the muscle, they go up into the bloodstream, they cross the blood-brain barrier, and they go into different areas of the brain. For example, the frontal part of our brain is called the frontal lobe. It's the most primitive part of the brain, and it's the biggest. And when I say biggest, I don't just mean in volume, I mean in the amount of neurons that is within the frontal lobe. And our frontal lobe is primarily responsible for executive functioning, thinking, processing speed, focus. So when these myokines go into the prefrontal cortex, they have an effect on these executive functions. So we are actually enhancing our cognition through resistance training.
Interesting. Yeah, and it's, you notice, if you really pay attention, even shortly after a bout of resistance training or high intensity interval training where you're maybe sitting in that slightly anaerobic area where you're producing more lactate. And for those that don't know what lactate is essentially a byproduct, dissociated form of, or lactic acid is the dissociated form. So when you get that burn, essentially.
Yeah.
But that burn that you're feeling is the buffering of hydrogen, isn't necessarily
it's not the lactic acid buildup. Yeah, there's a bit of a controversy around
so
that.
It's interesting because if you start paying attention to it, you notice it. You're like, wow, I get almost a brain rush, and the effect of lactate in the brain, from what I've read, is really, really quick. Have you explored BFR training for the brain at all? Doing
Not for the brain, but I've actually explored blood flow restriction training, and it was very, very difficult.
Yeah, from what I understand in my personal experience with BFR is because you are working that lactate threshold a little bit more, you're allowing yourself to kind of adapt to it. So there's a number of people that anecdotally claim that prior to doing any kind of intense mental bouts, they'll do BFR training, myself included, and it could be a placebo effect, but I've definitely noticed a pretty big impact on that. So I was curious if you had seen that.
Yeah, and just remember that if we know that we need more blood flow to the brain in order for our brain to keep thriving and functioning, therefore more blood flow in any specific area, even like leg strength, it has an effect on the brain in both the acute phase and in the long-term phase. Actually, there's people that argue about different areas of the body being great for the brain. And I can argue when it comes to longevity, you've probably got this as well, greater leg strength is, I would say, attributed to longevity. And it's the same for brain health. You know, there's so many studies that are being done on greater hypertrophy in the muscles or bigger quads, bigger brain, really. And, you know, I always think about, is that because of the resistance training or is that due to the muscle mass? And I'm kind of researching that right now.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought because usually the larger the muscle, obviously, the more myokines you're going to secrete. And that would make a lot of sense. And obviously, if you're pedaling on a bike ergometer and you're using predominantly quads and glutes, and a lot of these lactate threshold tests and these various tests are done on a bike ergometer versus running, because running is, although there's a lot of eccentric contraction and a lot of braking, it seems as though like the massive movement of the quadriceps and the glutes in like a bike ergometer fashion, there's probably a reason that's the gold standard for testing a lot of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And just remember, when we are exercising as well, we're doing something called cardiac remodeling. So we're really working on the muscles of our cardiac system. Remember, these arteries have muscles. The walls of these arteries are basically muscles, the same as the quads, same as your biceps. So every time you work out, you are strengthening the arteries. What does that mean? That has a lot to do with stroke volume, cardiac output, but basically that means that you are strengthening for every pump or for every beat that your heart pumps out blood, you are getting more perfusion to the brain with less heartbeats. If that makes sense. I'm trying to like bring the nomenclature down for everyone to understand that, like, the stronger your cardiac system is, the more efficient it is in delivering blood to all of the organs, including the heart, including the brain.
That's awesome. Okay, so we've got aerobic training, we've got resistance training, kind of bucketed into exercise. What would you say the next golden rule is?
The next golden rule would definitely be nutrients. Okay, I toggle between sleep or nutrients. I'm going to go into nutrients. I'm not going to talk about nutrition, but I do think that there are some nutrients that everybody should be ingesting. First one is creatine. So creatine is involved in cell energy metabolism. It helps with ATP production. And a lot of women, you know, I'm a female, and I see a lot of women are scared of taking creatine, mainly because they think they're going to get bloated or big. But when you realize that we now understand that creatine is not just good for the body, it's also good for the brain. It can help with brain energy. I think more people are jumping on that bandwagon. So starting at least 5 grams per day of creatine is a really good starting point to helping with brain energy.
Very interesting. I had Dr. Darren Kandow on the channel a couple of months ago. And he's one of the leading creatine researchers, and we were talking about that. And I had asked him the question, I was like, so what is it besides, you know, just ATP regeneration or the CP system in the brain? And he made a solid point about neuroinflammation as well, which was very, very interesting. Yeah,
absolutely. And look, it's also like we've seen so much research now in concussion research. They're now, you know, dosing NFL players with 20 grams of creatine per day because it's actually neuroprotective. So my father in 2019, he is 70 years old, so he was, you know, younger back then, but he had a stroke. It was a minor stroke, but we've got him now supplementing with 7.5 grams per day. So it doesn't matter what age you are. Actually, it doesn't even matter if you're in your teens. It still has a beneficial effect on the brain.
That's powerful. And it's something people notice really quick too.
Yeah, absolutely. Second to that, I would definitely say is omega-3 fatty acids. I think I'll just go to my grave talking about how good omega-3 fatty acids are for the brain. Particularly if you're having high dose EPA and DHA. So omega-3 fatty acids come from fatty fish, and they're broken up into 3 parts. You've got EPA, DHA, and ALA. And I would argue that EPA is more cardioprotective and the DHA is more abundant in brain tissue. Actually around, I forget the statistic, but it's around 58% of your brain is made up of the fat coming from DHA. So feeding it, what it's actually made of is, in my opinion, is really great for a healthy performing brain.
It's again, it's one of those things where I've noticed anecdotally that, and again, it could absolutely be placebo effect, but when I'm on my cod liver oil game and when I'm on my sardine game and I'm really like paying attention to that, I mean, I notice a significant improvement within days, sometimes literally within hours. I mean, if I feel like but that part could be a little bit more placebo effect, but I mean, I notice a huge difference.
Yeah, and you also realize that remember going back to 87 billion neurons, neurons are nerve cells. They've also got, just like the cells in our body, they've got membranes, okay? And in order for these membranes to move throughout your brain, they have to be fluidy. And this helps with cell membrane fluidity as well. So there's just so many benefits to it. And there's actually a really great randomized controlled trial that shows that people with mild cognitive impairment, if they're having, it was a high dose, it was 6 grams of EPA DHA per day, they can lower the amount of, it actually ameliorates plaques. So amyloid beta plaques, yeah.
Although I know we can never give people an exact number to take, I'll go on record and say that, oftentimes I'll take 5+ grams. Like, I will take a hefty amount. And if you eat some sardines, you eat a couple cans of sardines, I mean, you're getting way up there anyway.
Yeah.
But have you found sort of a minimum threshold that people should be aiming for?
2 grams of each. So that's essentially 2,000 milligrams of EPA and 2,000 milligrams of DHA per day.
And any specific kind that people should be looking for? Because I know, like, if you go walk into Walmart, you're going to find some pretty cruddy, esterized kind of cruddy fatty acids. Like, is there kind of a framework that you give people to find the ideal omega-3?
Well, I would start actually with who's the brand that you're having. Make sure that every brand of supplement that you're having is being tested by third-party testing places. For example, I'm having a high dose EPA DHA. I'm not having an omega-3 per se. I'm actually, because I eliminate the ALA, I'm just getting EPA DHA.
Okay. Yeah, the ALA, it's like less than a 1% or something conversion. It's pretty sad. And
Absolutely.
People get the idea that, I'm eating a grass-fed steak and it's got high amounts of omega-3. It's like, no, that's land omega-3 is not the same.
Yeah, and I'll just be caution also, because a lot of people are like, oh, Louisa, why can't I just eat fish? Unfortunately, most of the fish in the US is farmed and also around the world. So it completely strips the EPA DHA. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we could have a whole separate discussion on this, but it's been, Andrew Huberman talks a lot about the benefits of EPA, where I've always touted the benefits of DHA, right?
Yeah.
And it's difficult a lot of times when you're looking at lower quality fish oils. A lot of times you'll find that you're looking at like astronomical EPA to DHA ratios. I tend to say the quality of a fish oil is like, hey, the closer you can get that gap, the better, typically.
Absolutely.
If you look at cold water fish, you look at anchovies, you look at, sardines, you look at these things, they're closer, right? Because in all intents and purposes, it's probably cheaper to get an EPA form than a DHA form. So I always kind of caution the same. I was like, try to get that, that DHA up as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, absolutely. And the only last thing I'll add on top of all of this nutrient is such an easy one. It's hydration. We tend to forget how important hydration is. And I'm not talking just water. I'm also talking electrolytes. At my company, when we bring on an athlete, we do sweat testing on them to really perfect their ratios of electrolytes and water so they can perform at their peak. So making sure that you're having, obviously, a lot of water throughout the day. I always say 3 liters of water, but then supplementing as well with just 1 sachet of electrolytes. Like, the way our brain functions and the way our nerves communicate with each other, they need adequate amounts of sodium, potassium, magnesium. What are they? They're electrolytes. So we need to be replacing them in order to not decrease our cognitive capacity.
Yeah. To some of these other minerals, things like zinc and manganese and some of these others, do they play a pretty important role as well?
Oh yeah, they do. When you sweat, you're not just sweating water, you're sweating out zinc, selenium, magnesium, potassium, sodium. I think we've got this culture now of being scared of salt. It's like, even if you're not sweating, let's just say, because I'm not a huge sweater, even if I'm exercising a lot, but I still need to be replacing the electrolytes that I lose as well.
Is there a particular and this can get nuanced, but is there a particular ratio that, like, say, the average person should be looking at? Like, obviously there's electrolytes that are more skewed towards sodium, more that are skewed towards potassium, some that are, and I guess, I mean, perhaps it depends on what effect you're looking for, a more calming effect with more magnesium based, maybe sodium if you're a little bit more depleted from sweat. Is there like an electrolyte that you find is most important for the brain?
I would say, so the one that I'm having now has 1,000 milligrams of sodium and I think 500 milligrams of potassium and magnesium. So I'm thinking that the sodium is most likely going to be the most important one there.
Yeah, that's a hefty amount of potassium, which is nice to see too, because I know potassium is kind of interestingly regulated to where it's hard to get certain dosages up above 200 in different categories.
Yeah.
So anyhow, okay, so we've got exercise, we've got nutrition, hydration.
Yeah.
What else have we got?
So sleep is probably the third one that we're going to talk about. So sleep is, I always say it's our most underrated high performance tool that we have. So we've got 4 stages of sleep, and I'm just going to touch on the 2 most important stages. That's REM sleep and deep sleep. So you've probably heard of them. And do you wear any fitness trackers? You've got 3 on. Do you track and measure your sleep?
I try to triangulate and cross-reference between all of them. So sometimes it's difficult to get the exact number because they all will sometimes say different things.
But if you're looking on it, because I'm kind of like you too, if you look on it, you'll see that you've got your REM sleep score and then you've got deep sleep. It's also known as slow wave sleep. Now, during REM sleep, this is when we get all of our memory consolidation and learning happening. I also refer to REM sleep as emotional first aid. And I always find that I'm like, I can be a bit more angry if I'm not getting enough REM sleep. So optimizing for REM sleep is extremely important. It's extremely important for the way that we learn and the way that we operate. So I'm just going to leave that there for now, and then I'm going to go into deep sleep for a second. Deep sleep is important for 2 reasons. One is we get a lot of our hormones that get released during deep sleep. We have growth hormone, which is responsible for protein synthesis and the regeneration of muscles. Men get a lot of their testosterone released during that stage. Women, we get a lot of our estrogen released and many other hormones. But another amazing thing happens during that stage is we get the activation of the lymphatic system. It's just like the lymphatic system in the brain, but lymphatic system in the body, but it's in the brain. And it's basically like a sewage system for the brain. So what happens is our glial cells, which is another type of brain cell, they shrink in size, and it allows for our cerebral spinal fluid to wash through the brain like a washing machine. And what it does is it's getting rid of all of the gunk, okay, all of the toxin and the debris that builds up during the day. And in fact, one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease, which is amyloid beta, actually gets released and washed out during that stage.
It's like literal brainwashing.
Literal brainwashing. And it's funny because it was only just recently discovered. I think it was like out of Rochester University, not many years ago. We didn't really know that we had a brain sewage system. But it gets activated only during deep sleep. So we have to be optimizing every single night for deep sleep. So I always say that you're planning for sleep the moment that you wake up. Sleeping in a dark room. I say that you have to warm up for sleep. So around 8:30 p.m., getting your body and your brain rested for sleep. You have to warm up for sleep and treat sleep as if it's like a sport.
It's a good way of putting it. Yeah, I mean, it's like with sleep, sometimes it becomes this, I don't want to say monumental task, but it becomes, I put more effort into my sleep priority than I do my pre-workout or even my warm-up for my workouts. It's like, it's so easy to put the cart before the horse. Yeah. But this is like one of the biggest levers that you can possibly pull. Unfortunately, we're starting to see that, see this emerging in more research and just on social media in general. Are there, so in the deep sleep, that's typically, you're hitting that early on in your sleep in the first few hours, like 4 or 5 hours, and then you kind of cycle through these like more shallow stages, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And the thing is, when you look at a hypnogram, if you look at your sleep at the end of the 8 hours that you're asleep, you're not just staying in light sleep, deep sleep, REM sleep. You're toggling, you're going up and down, and a lot of the time, sometimes you're even awake. So you're just going through each of these stages. So it's hard to like really understand, during the 90-minute cycles that you go through when you're in deep sleep, when you're in REM sleep. But we're toggling through them all throughout the night. Temperature plays a huge role in this. If you get too hot during the night. It may wake you up and may kick you out of deep sleep or may kick you out of REM sleep. So sleeping in a cool room is also why it's really beneficial for sleep. But what you want to generally focus on is total sleep time should be made up. I would say 20% of total sleep time should be spent in REM sleep. And I generally like to say around 35% of total sleep time should also be in deep sleep. So you should be having more deep sleep than REM sleep.
Interesting. And REM sleep is going to be the one that really is helping us with like reacting and like emotionally reacting, and like if you're short with your wife or you're short with your spouse, like things like that. Like so, and I always kind of have said, and correct me if I'm wrong, that like sometimes like going through light and deep is sort of a necessary evil that you have to get through. I shouldn't say evil, but a necessary cycle or evil that you have to get through in order to achieve that REM. And it's like the body will almost prioritize the deep over the REM because you can survive with the deep sleep and you can get by without a lot of REM, but you're just going to feel very sluggish and reactive.
Yeah, and you're also probably not going to learn and retain a lot of the information that you learn during the day. And this is great for school kids as well, because you think about the learning process and it happens, it's a two-part process. It happens like right now, everybody's probably learning something, but the penetration of that learning actually takes place during sleep.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's just like you have to think of it just like you would think of, with your workout. It's like you're doing the damage, you're doing the triggering the response and having the stressor, but the priority or at the end of the day, the bulk of what's happening as far as the result you're trying to get is happening at night.
Absolutely. And the last thing I'd have to say with sleep, it is also very much impacted with glucose regulation, which you would know as well.
Very much so.
Yeah.
So you probably recommend not eating a few hours before bed, things like that?
Absolutely. And the more that you sleep, I would say the more of an appetite suppressant you have. I always find if I don't sleep as well at night, if I'm sleeping like 6 hours, let's just say, and I've got a really busy schedule, I'm hungrier during the day and it's harder for me to say no to the bad food.
Yeah. And it becomes a vicious cycle because then you make poorer choices and then you probably eat later at night and then you sleep worse again. And then next thing you know, it's in this like giant cycle.
Yeah.
All right. So exercise, nutrition, sleep. What else have we got?
One that we don't usually talk about, social connection. So a wonderful Harvard study was actually just published and it was an 80-year study. So it was a very big one. And they tracked and measured people's brain performance and long-term brain health. And what they found that scored above everything else was actually long-term social relationships. So I'm not going to say that it is a loving relationship. It's not necessarily, you have to be married to have, no, it's not that. It is your brain loves social connection and it loves safety and it loves having that, that love and that caring factor. And what they found was that those who were able to live and have great brain health into their 90s and even ones who reached 100 was social connection.
Interesting.
Yeah. So when you look deeper into it, it's got a hormonal aspect to it. Maybe it's because of the amount of love and safety and oxytocin and serotonin that gets released during that stages. But I fundamentally think that study was built around safety. Your brain knowing that you are safe, therefore it lowers the stress response, it lowers the inflammatory biomarkers that are released. That's how I think about that.
That's such an interesting way to look at it. Yeah, because it's like we try to get so granular and look at every single little mechanistic thing and be like, well, why is social connection doing this and that? In reality, it just comes down to like, and it's just even this such a foundation for so many things, not just, your sleep, not just anything. It's just a matter of if someone wants to feel grounded, they need to feel safe. You talk about in relationships, you're like, well, what does one person in a relationship do to the other to make them feel safe, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what everyone is looking for. And sometimes our egos get in the way of it. But even men, like we want to feel safe. We don't want to feel betrayed. We want to feel like we can lay our heads down at night, and probably explains why even, financial stress can mess with people so much. It's just like, sure, you got the minutia of the stress, but the deep down, like core stress that's coming from, shoot, I don't feel safe. Can I provide for my family? Is my family safe? And it's just like this guttural response that makes so much sense.
Yeah, and it's funny, somebody put this up on social media the other day. They said, what do they do to prisoners when they really want to that they isolate prisoners if they've been bad or something. I don't know the premise of it, but they isolate them, which shows you that that's punishment. So isolation is punishment, and that's what they do in prison. So you've got to think about that in our lives. Isolation is punishment for the brain. So finding outlets for social connection, but also knowing that a deep connection with another person is going to help you with survivability in the long term.
That's not to mention improve your performance, right?
Improve your performance, absolutely.
So if someone, let's say, there's a lot of self-proclaimed introverts, and I know without getting into the nitty-gritty of what really makes an introvert or an introverted extrovert and yada yada, maybe there's people that are just busy, right? They're working 50, 60 hours a week. They just don't have time. They come home, they have kids. I want to make it probably pretty clear that social media is probably not the same as real social interaction. Yeah. But what are some things that people can do? If they're busy people, they're like, okay, this is a valuable tool in my toolbox. How do I gamify getting some social interaction?
The first place that I would say is if you do exercise and you have time to exercise, do it in a group. I've actually found myself in the same situation. So most of my family and friends, I grew up in Australia, and I was lacking that social connection when I first moved to New York. I found a running group, and then that became my social connection. And so I do it through exercise. That's probably the best part of doing it. Or even I've got a lot of clients who then go into mum groups. Walk the kids around with 4 or 5 other mothers.
It's a good idea. I mean, consolidation of efforts, right? It's
Absolutely.
If you bucket all these things we're talking about,
yeah.
and it seems monumental, and you're like, well, wait a minute, no, I can consolidate my exercise.
Instead of exercising by yourself, find a group to do it with.
Okay, so we've got 4. We've got exercise, nutrition, we've got our sleep, we've got our social interaction.
Yeah. The last one is what I mentioned earlier as part of exercise, but it's neuroathletics training or neurocognitive training. So imagine you've got 4 lobes of the brain, but then you've also got another one, I call it the 5th lobe, it's a cerebellum. Every area of the brain is accounted for. Have you ever heard of the homunculus? Mm-hmm. Or you've seen the homunculus? You've got to Google it on YouTube. It's basically this anatomical structure that shows you which area of the brain is getting utilized by which organ. For example, by which, your feet, your hands, wherever it is. So every single area of the brain is accounted for. And it follows the premise of use it or lose it. So if you stop using an area of your brain, it will atrophy because it says, well, Louisa doesn't need me anymore, so I'm just going to leave. As we get older, we stop using certain areas of our brain. For example, we stop climbing trees. We stop going out and doing things because we're older. Okay, we don't climb trees anymore.
I do.
So,
no, I'm just kidding.
You do. But so neurocognitive training is really enhancing every area of the brain. For example, it's such an easy thing. Doing things such as hand-eye coordination, reaction training, vision training. These are all going to enhance every aspect of the brain. So if you're at home and you're thinking, what the hell is she talking about? I'll give you a really easy example. You just need 2 balls. Just get 2 tennis balls and start throwing the ball to the wall. What you're doing during that aspect is you're getting hand-eye coordination, you're getting reaction time, you're getting vision. You can mix it up and do balance and coordination, like you can throw the ball to the wall on one leg. You can even, so some of our guys, we give them eye patches, so they're just working with just 50% of their vision. And you think, that seems pretty easy, but let me tell you, it is so hard once you actually start doing it. And if you do this, you can do this for 5 minutes a day. You can do this for 10 minutes a day. It has profound effects on the brain. And this is not just in the acute stages either. This is long-term brain effects. There was a study that was actually produced in Nature that showed 12 weeks of juggling. They got people to juggle for 20 minutes a day, 12 weeks, actually grew the gray matter of their brain. So we have gray matter, which is the cell bodies. We have white matter, which houses our myelinated neurons. So you can actually thicken your cortex through things such as hand-eye coordination drills.
Interesting. So, I mean, can these actions like reaction time drills and light drills, can these translate into other areas of brain performance?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. So it's just, because I think it's like you mentioned, you don't realize, okay, you're also getting vision, you're also getting this. It's not just hand-eye coordination.
Yeah. Think about focus and decision-making. fundamentally some of the most important things that we do. As we get older, our focus actually decreases. And it turns out that in order to increase our cognitive load, we'll call it, because that's what we all want. We want to slow the brain aging process. In order to do that, you need to be focused on different tasks. You need to be focused on nutrition, focused at the gym. So what are we doing to increase our focus capacity? These drills increase focus. They increase your decision-making drills. Not to mention, I think the statistic? I think the number one cause of traffic accidents on the road is reaction time. So it's helping in every aspect of life.
Wow. That is really cool. So, I mean, literally just as simple as like juggling when you're sitting on the couch or just throwing a ball against the wall.
Yeah, and our cerebellum, which is also known as the mini brain that sits just behind the brainstem, it's involved in motor control, it's involved in posture and coordination, and we stop using that. Like a lot of the times, think about the last time you were just standing on one leg for an hour, half an hour. We need these things as we get older, but we also need them right now in order to improve all of these cognitive reactions.
That's so wild. I mean, is it one of these things where, I mean, being able to practice these things on the regular, I mean, how quickly can people see benefits from this?
I would say 6 weeks of training. Yeah, deliberate training.
And just spending what, like 10 minutes, 15 minutes?
15 minutes a day, just get 2 balls and just start really easy. And I always say just upper hand grip them, overhand grip, throwing the ball to the wall, stand a meter away from it, and judge yourself based on time. Time yourself. I was able to throw the ball to the wall for 60 seconds without dropping it. Maybe step back and see how many times you can do it to the wall. Go to 2 minutes, go to 3 minutes. This is also going to help with focus endurance, your ability to focus for a long period of time.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I've often wondered when you look at, various sports, like when you see someone fatigue, like one of the first things that goes is either their focus or their motor control, or like, they start, stumbling over themselves. And like one thing that I've noticed personally is like if I'm hiking at altitude and I'm like doing a trek up above 10,000 feet, my reaction time, all that stuff starts to go, right? And it just goes to show kind of the compound effect of all these different things we're talking about. Like less oxygen going to the brain, then like you come back to that monkey brain where it's just like pure survival. So when you look at like an athlete, if they are doing like cognitively demanding tasks or perhaps reaction tasks, you see them on TV doing them like when they're exhausted. Is there literature to back up like doing these things when you're cardiovascularly spent? Hey, go sprint and then do this cognitive task, or go sprint and then do this reaction time. It's arguably harder because you're tired, but does there seem to be a benefit, or is that just busy work that doesn't have a practical application?
No, they actually do this with Formula One drivers, because you've got to think about it as if you're doing weights for the brain. And you want to be able to do as much as you can in a fatigued state to build that, because the more resilient that your brain is, the better it's going to be during a competition. And I've seen, I've worked with, some Formula One drivers, and what they go through mentally, it is so taxing on their brain. So we have to get them to a place where they are completely fatigued when they think they're going to give up, and then give them the exercise so they can learn how to push through that, that moment of like fatigability.
Wow, that is so wild.
Yeah.
So wow. Okay, so at the end of the day, you've got exercise, we've got nutrition, we've got sleep, we've got social connection, and we've got actual brain training.
Yes.
So Louisa, this has been awesome. Thank you so much. And where can everyone find you?
Thanks, Thomas. On Instagram, I hang out there a lot, Louisa Nicola, or I've got a podcast, The Neuro Experience.
Beautiful. As always, keep it locked in here on the channel. See you tomorrow.